Welcome back to the Detox Docs Report. I'm Dr. Diana, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Brantley May. He brings together building science, indoor environmental consulting, moisture control, mechanical systems, and mycology in a way that is incredibly relevant for you. He's a building scientist, council certified indoor environmental consultant, and a state licensed mold assessor. He's also certified in the microscopic examination and identification of fungal spores and pollen, and he teaches other pros in the indoor environmental space. So, Brantley, thank you so much for being here.
Of course, more than happy.
So, before we dive in, I'd love to hear how you got into this work. You have such an interesting combination of building science and mycology, microscopy. So, what led you down this path?
Well, my mom and my dad are mold remediators. And so, when I was, 15 or 16 years old, they started their company. And when I turned 17, I started working with them. Well, I call it work, but I guess it's not work if you're not getting paid, right? And, but, just ripping out mold. And, whenever family business, you're kind of in and out, right? And I left. I started working for Apple, funny enough. I was a site support engineer for Apple, and I learned a lot of techniques on root cause analysis and critical thinking skills that they would teach on us problem solving and bugging out issues. And came back, and I was at that point way more interested in the investigation side of things. And so I just kind of started my own company doing inspections for mold. And as I grew, I realized that there's more problems than just mold. And then, I started dealing with my own health stuff, which I've been back and forth in my life. And I realized like how important it is to be able to handle sensitive situations, complex situations for people that are immunocompromised or immunosuppressed. And so now that's usually where we hang our hat. We do mostly stuff for people that have mold-related illnesses or autoimmune issues. And then we deal with complex cases. That's our job.
Awesome, awesome. And I know you've come out with this course recently, which we're going to talk about in this episode because it's awesome. But I love that in that course, you start by reminding people what mold actually is, because I think that's so important because people often think of mold as a spot on the wall or something mysterious, something that is, kind of lurking behind the walls. So can you just give us a brief summary? I love how you explain it in the course, but can you give us a brief summary of how mold works as a living organism and why that matters when we're thinking about our homes?
Sure. I mean, depends on how nerdy you want me to get. But fungi in general, it's its own kingdom, right? So we have all these different
Right.
kingdoms. We're in the animal kingdom, but you have plants and then you have bacteria, and fungi have their own kingdom and they deserve their own kingdom because they're very special. What makes them different? Well, they're very different than plants, as though they may look similar and you might think that they're similar. Plants are very specific because they can produce their own sugars. They have photosynthesis. If we remember back in fifth grade biology, they get stuff from the sun and they convert it to sugar. Mushrooms can't do that. Mold can't do that, right? So they have to digest their food. They have to find sugars and find foods. And here they have a huge source of those things in the environment or in our house. And, the other thing that makes them very unique, different from animals, is we ingest food in our mouths and our bellies munch it up and digest it. You know all about that. And they do the opposite, right? Instead of putting the apple in their mouth, going inside and then breaking it down into simple components, they embed themselves into it. They release chemicals, and those chemicals will break down the components into simpler parts, and then they absorb them. And so why is that important? What makes it? Well, the first thing I want to point out is these things are everywhere, and they're actually necessary for life. They are the decomposers of the world. So we're going to find it every step you take outside. There's miles of mycelium, which are the root-like structures of the mold, underneath your feet. And there are quite literally millions of spores underneath your feet every time you walk. So, the first step is to recognize, let's regulate our nervous systems here, and let's realize that this is out there, right? If someone comes in and does an air sample in your house and they see mold spores in the air, if you're worried about that, I don't want you to know how many spores you're stepping in when you're going outside to ground yourself. you know,
Right,
um,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly, so true.
So keep in mind that. But with that being said, moisture thrives on, or mold thrives on moisture. And so whenever we have a moisture issue in our house and it goes unchecked, right, then that is when it actually does cause some problems, because the house is very different than the outside environment, where there's UV, day and night cycles, humidity cycles, dry, wet, different biology out there to keep the balance, right? When you start having mold grow in your house because of these moisture issues, they are going to start eating on these materials, like we said, that they need to digest and eat their foods. They produce chemicals during that process. A lot of them can be a concern for us, an exposure risk, like mycotoxins. And then, once they reproduce, which they're going to throw spores around in the air, just like a mushroom would, they can be allergenic. They can be potentially pathogenic, causing infection. And a lot of them can have toxins associated with them. So it's important. Now, one of the biggest problems that we find with misinformation about mold in the environment is that, if mold gets in your house, it's just going to spread. You need a moisture source, right? There has to be moisture. And so no moisture, no mold. And so really, when it comes down to it, the most important thing to know about mold is that it needs moisture. And that's why we need to be very, very good at identifying moisture sources.
Yeah, so true. And that environment inside our bodies can be a very, nice moist environment for
Mm-hmm.
mold as well, but like to keep our microbiomes in check. So interesting. Thanks. And so when we talk about the air quality, we talk a lot about molds, but as you said, you learned early on that it wasn't just mold and there's several pieces to the puzzle, and that it's moisture. Mold is a moisture issue. But how do these different components come into play in our home? So we've got moisture, ventilation, we've got our HVAC, we've got dust, we've got the building materials. Like, what's the biggest deal? How can all of these affect our indoor environment?
Well, if we look at it from a building science perspective, in the in the early 1900s, we were doing pretty good. We built our buildings out of solid wood, plaster. There really wasn't much insulation to speak of. And so when, the function of insulation is to create a resistance of heat transfer. So that way, when it's really, really cold outside, the house doesn't get really, really cold. There's some resistance there with the heat in the house escaping. We want insulation in the walls so it doesn't go out. Imagine going outside without a jacket on, right? Immediately you're cold. But if you put a nice big fluffy jacket that has insulation in it, it keeps you warm for a little bit. And so before we put insulation in our walls, we actually didn't have that much problem with mold, because what happened when things got wet is that they dried themselves. And how does it dry? Well, things dry because they need energy, right? So if something's a liquid and you apply heat and energy to it, it will evaporate eventually and dry out. Well, if you're stuffing things in your walls that are preventing energy from transferring, what do you think is going to happen when that wall gets wet, right? Now it's more likely to stay wet and not dry. And then mix on top of that, as things continued, we replaced plaster with drywall. We replaced solid wood with OSB and sheathing, right? Which are basically chunks of half digested wood, which I'm sure mold is like, thanks, And then on top of that, we dealt with the energy crisis in the 70s, which made energy efficiency a huge deal. And now our insulation got better, more efficient. We started dealing with air conditioning systems. Now we're dealing with complex networks of airflow. We're dealing with pressure imbalances. We're dealing with hot hitting cold. And now, flash forward to today, things are cheaper materials, way more energy efficient, way more airtight. And when the building gets more airtight, whatever's going on in the building, you're stuck in the building with, right? And so a small mold problem back in 1910 was a small mold problem because there was so much natural ventilation. Now it's a big mold problem because you're stuck in there with it. And so we have to consider that ventilation it's a huge deal, not just for mold, but for other pollutants that are in the house. We create a lot of pollutants, with cleaning, cooking, showering, whatever the case may be. There's pollutants inside. We slough off particulate, so do your animals, and it goes on and on and on, right? And so ventilation is huge. HVAC systems are huge because they're handling the conditioning, cooling, drying, filtration, and what building materials are we bringing in? So now there's chemical component to this. So yeah, as time goes on, we have to be more and more mindful because as we add things into our environment to worsen the air quality, we're also making the houses tighter, which are basically trapping us in there with it. So we are now kind of at the cusp of how regulations and code are requiring ventilation, which is great. So now we're getting some fresh air, but it's tricky. And because it's so novel to a lot of contractors, it's being done wrong. And so it's kind of an interesting time right now to try to fix air quality issues.
Yeah, so interesting. And I've heard that phrase a lot, like let the home breathe, or does the home need to breathe? What do you think about
I don't want the home to breathe. I want me to breathe.
that?
Um, yeah, I
That's
don't.
fair, but well, you've heard that, right? That's
Yeah, yeah, and
the word
I
like
think
the homes need to
there's some
breathe
truth
or
to it. I
need to
think there's just
ventilate,
some.
but I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, just some. We got to fix the nomenclature. So
absolutely.
the house, we want fresh air in the house because we want fresh air. We want to be able to dilute what's in there. We want to be able to breathe fresh, but we don't want the house to breathe through the walls, through the windows, from the attic, from the crawl space. We want to control where it's coming in. So there is no such thing as a house that's too tight as long as you're bringing in fresh air. Because if it's not too tight and someone says, well, we'll just do natural ventilation, where's that coming from? It's coming from the
Right.
attic, which fiberglass, roach poop, humidity, mold. It's coming from the crawl space, radon, right? So let's get the house as tight as we can and then control the air by going through a filtration, dehumidification, cooling, and all the things that it needs.
Yeah, I do like the phrase, the solution to pollution is dilution. That one I think checks out.
Yeah, I like to say that it's the secondary solution. The primary solution
Mm,
is source control. Because
yes,
if you have a
yes.
pollutant in your house, let's get it out first. Should you go buy that rug from the, $20 rug from Amazon that's going to be off gassing the chemicals in your house forever? And are you being mindful of the paint that you're using? When you're cooking, are you using your range hood to get all those particulates and chemicals out when you're cooking? Are we handling the mold problem? So source control is always number one.
Mhm.
But we are going to have a
Absolutely.
natural level of pollutants that we need to dilute.
So the solution to pollution is source control. Doesn't have the same ring to it, but you guys heard it here. Let's remember that. Okay, and then so I love how you say a lot on your pages. There's a difference between presence and exposure, right? So uh, there on the flip side though too, if you don't have to see visible mold for it to be affecting your indoor air quality. So just to underscore that, how can a home look clean, be clean, you clean regularly, but still.
Well, most of the areas that don't dry well are the ones that grow mold, right? Because if it's staying wet, and most of the areas that don't dry well are the ones that are inside of walls and places you can't see. And so most often we find what people would call hidden mold, in walls, underneath your kitchen sink, and all these areas can grow mold that isn't easily obvious, but it could still affect the air quality. And yes, it may be in a wall, and it may be less exposure than if it was on the surface of the wall, but we still have airflow imbalances, pressure imbalances in the house that can cause forces to pull that stuff in from the wall cavities, from the kitchen sink, from wherever it is into the breathing space. And so anything that can get into the breathing space that's a pollutant is technically an exposure risk. Now, the presence versus exposure is huge because we need to know, okay, we know that there's a presence of mold, but we also, as an indoor environmentalist, I have to understand what the exposure risk is of that. So, for example, if I had a very large amount of mold underneath your tile flooring, well, if your tile flooring is completely sealed, the exposure risk of that could be actually quite low, even though it's a large amount, because it's not getting into your breathing space. And that is also true of the mycotoxins. A lot of people think mycotoxins can just like perfuse through things, and that's not true. Mycotoxins are
So
typically, which we
interesting.
could talk about later, but
Yeah,
mycotoxins are not a gas, right? They're bound to
right.
the fungal fragment or structure or spore, and so we don't really see that happening. But It doesn't mean the exposure is zero. It just means that it's less than if it were, exposed. Now, you might look at a large amount of mold underneath tile and say the exposure risk is lower, but a small amount of mold in your HVAC system, like on your vents or in your ducts, could be a large exposure risk because of where it is. So whenever you have an environmentalist in there, you have to really like ask them, are you considering what the exposure risk is to these things, right? Because if you just swab in the back of a kitchen cabinet and it shows some dangerous mold, that doesn't tell me how much I'm breathing that in, especially if the cabinets are staying closed, we don't really use it too much, we're all the way on the other side of the house. What's the exposure risk of that? And so that's kind of huge. But a lot of people will think, well, just because it's not in my site doesn't mean, it just means that it's not going to affect the air quality. Well, that's not true at all. We do pressure and balance testing all the time, and we always see air coming out of wall cavities and underneath cabinets and stuff. So it's always possible. The question is how much.
Absolutely. I think it's so important from the clinical side too. That's what I often investigate with people when I'm consulting is, okay, if there's a family, say, and there's one child is more affected than anyone else, maybe it was because the mold was literally behind the wall that they were sleeping next to or things like that. And it was this, giant slab of mold there versus the whole other end of the house. And maybe it wasn't really so much of an exposure. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other factors in, previous state of health and everything like that, as far as how much mold is going to affect you clinically as far as symptoms go. One of the top ones being how sensitive to mold are you? Because for one person, a small exposure could be totally fine. And for another person, it's going to trigger a mast cell flare. So definitely important to weigh all those variables with the pros. So for somebody who is already sick and potentially very overwhelmed by this whole mold, biotoxins, all this whole, all this info, what is the hierarchy when checking a home? And I know, again, it's in your course as well, but what are the first, most urgent things to check before they go start spending money on tests and things?
Well, I would probably say you never want to just start with a test. That's never the best way to go. If you suspect that you have a mold issue in your house, whether it be symptomatic or things that you're seeing, sensing, smelling in the home, the first line of defense would be an inspection, a visual inspection. Now, the hard part is finding the right person, right? That's a whole different conversation, and I know that that's a problem. And I tell people, hey, you got to start with a thorough inspection. And usually the answer is, well, Brantley, it's hard to find someone that knows what they're looking for, that's going to be thorough, blah, blah, blah. That's why we created the homeowner course on how to find it yourself. But that is the first step, right? It would almost be like if someone in your field of work, right, a patient was starting to not feel good. And they're like, oh, man, I'm not feeling good. I'm having these symptoms, whatever. I think the wrong question would be like, well, what test should I start with? The real question is, where do I find a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a functional, whatever, a practitioner that can actually listen to me, understand what my symptoms are, and guide me on the right path, on the right test to do, on the right protocol. And that is the same thing with the indoor environment. You can't just do a DIY test and it gives you all the answers, because there is no single test that's going to give you all the answers, just like there's no single test in medicine that's going to give you all the answers. Imagine if I went into an environment and they gave me symptoms and I said, oh man, yeah, this is making you sick. You should go check your thyroid antibodies. You know what I mean? And that's the only thing they check. It's not going to give them a full picture. You gotta do a good assessment of what's going on and then create a good plan holistically. And you can't do that with a single test.
Absolutely. Yeah, so true. I think that's one of the most common questions I get, and probably what you get as well. I feel sick, what test should I do to check for mold? And that's why I'm like, okay, here is the info. You really need an evaluation. That's why I send people to my symptoms quiz first. And I'm like, my question back to you is, what are your symptoms, right? Because I don't know what tests you really need until I know what's going on with you. You may need a few different tests, or we may not want to start with testing at all. So that's so important. So I'm gonna, I want to talk about your course now, because I think we've already alluded to it a couple times. So Okay, we say the best test is an assessment. And you've gone further than that now for people to say the best DIY test is not a petri dish, is not the air sample canister that you can order. It is actually a DIY assessment. So tell me about your course and what people like, who is it for and who can this help?
Sure. Well, the course is for people that have a lot of pain points with finding the right assessor, um, finding an assessor they can afford, right? Maybe they can't afford an assessor. Maybe it's logistical challenges, right? I'm trying to find a rental. I'm trying to find a home. I can't get someone to inspect a rental when we're looking at two or three of them a day. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's just not
Mhm.
logistically possible. Or it's a preliminary, like before I spend a whole bunch of money on this thing, I like to get just a scope and see what's going on. Maybe it's someone that's curious and they just want to know more about how to empower themselves when they do talk to professionals, right? I guarantee you, if you took our DIY course on how to find moisture and mold, which teaches you the moisture meter, the flashlight techniques and what to look for and what you need to do, you're going to have a really good idea of what it takes to do a good mold inspection. And then when you call a mold inspection specialist, right, a mold assessor or a mold remediator, you'll have so much knowledge on what that looks like, and you'll know exactly what to ask, what questions are just like their answers, if they're good answers or bad answers, and so it's really just for a holistic view of like what do I need to do. But at the end of the day, what it's actually designed for is boots on the ground inspection. Like, how do I find the moisture and mold? The problem that we had and the reason we created the course is because there's so many courses out there. Vast majority aren't online, and the other ones are just someone with a PowerPoint or talking to a camera and teaching, and it's good information, but it's all conceptual. Like, here are the different types of mold, and here, then this one has the. That's not important. A homeowner needs to know, where do I find it, right? What do I look for? Where are the building flaws? How do I find the moisture in the mold? And that's what the course is for. It's very, very boots on the ground. That's why, like, and you've went through the course, you completed the course.
Mhm.
You know, it's mostly like in the field, right? We're
Right.
in the house, we're in the attic, we're in the crawl space, or whatever, like showing you this right here. Look for this, and so we wanted that because I'm gonna be honest. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to teach you for 2 hours on different types of mold. You just need to know how to find it, right? And so
Right.
that's kind of what it was all about. Is just, let's get down and dirty. Let's make it as quick as possible. Give them 90% of what they need to know in 3.5 hours with all these like little bite-sized videos on how to find mold in their house. And this is going to be a lifelong skill. So that way, when you go look for the new house, the rental, or you go to your mom's house, you go to your daughter's house or whatever, you can bring those skills and say, that's not good, that's not good, that's not good. And we've seen that time and time again from testimonials that people have reached out to us and they're like, oh my gosh, like, I went through 5, 10 rentals and I was just like, no, 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 no. And we finally found one that we feel good, and we decided that we were going to bring someone in. And that's awesome. Like, I even actually had someone else, my video producer, told me the same thing. They ended up feeling comfortable enough just to move forward with putting a contract on the rental, but they said no to like 15 rentals before that. They didn't need to do a single test on them. They didn't have to wait for an ERMI to get back on. Like, he went in and he said, I don't like the way the gutters are. The windows aren't good. I found this water damage issue under the kitchen sink. Nope, next. And that's what we want. We want people to be able to empower themselves to find their own issues and make educated decisions at a reasonable cost. We don't want you to have to spend $1,000 on an assessment every time.
Right. Yeah. Or all these ERMI tests and everything really add up. And like you said, waiting for results. Yeah. So I took the course, and I have to admit, when I first signed into it, I thought, okay, well, I'll just kind of, do this while I'm doing other things, or I'll come back to it every now and then and maybe finish it eventually. Because I didn't need it, personally immediately, but I actually, binge watched the whole thing because it was so captivating and actually so, so useful. So as someone who has several courses online, I would say I was really impressed by all the practical info. And for those of you listening who may be thinking, okay, so what exactly is in this course? Something that you didn't mention that I think is so useful is the checklist. Like the just that checklist you can just take with you in the resources. Of course, go through the videos, but in the resources there are checklists and things that you can take with you and just kind of go down when you don't want to like open up the video and have it, playing with you. But and I've already recommended this course to people, especially I have one client who is in that situation where she's looking for a new place and she's like, this is, exactly what I need to go ahead and look for places without having to test each one or feeling like, okay, well, I can't test each one. Now, do I just have to go in just hoping and praying that it's going to be okay? Or maybe I'll never find a safe place to live. So I think it's really empowering for people. And it also has some of that mycology for those of you who like that.
Yeah.
So love it. And we will put the link to the course with a discount in the show notes.
Yeah, that
So
checklist
yeah,
took a lot of energy and a lot
yeah,
of time and trials, right? Like using it on houses and be like, no, we got to add this. And no, we should remove this. It's too complicated. Because the whole time we're going through the course, we made the course at a fifth grade level. That was our goal because we want
mm-hmm.
everyone to understand it, right? That means like the verbiage, the type of technical information we're providing, like it almost has no technical information. And the checklist too. How is the checklist going to be useful for someone that, let's pretend they never even watched the course? Could they use this to get an idea of what's going on in their house? And that's really hard when you're trying to put something on a checklist to say, for example, check the gutters, right? Well,
Right.
what am I supposed to be checking, right? And so we had to make it not too specific, but also not too vague. And then you can mark green, yellow, red. And green, yellow, red is very subjective, but it was way better than some of the other options like problem, not problem, or give it a score. Like you can't do that.
Yeah, so many
And then
scores.
we
Yeah.
we created it as a design to where you can actually put a description per issue, and then you can hold on to that as a. Some people actually reached out and said like, this is amazing as a like a 3 month thing. Like I'm going to do this every couple months as a
Right.
maintenance on my house, and then I could see like if it's getting better, worse, or what's going on. And then other people said this is going to be amazing to hand to my mold inspector and say these are the things
Right.
that I identified, and so it's just yeah, the checklist was actually a lot more popular than I thought it would be. And then of course we
I
have a lot
know.
of
That's immediately, I remember texting you like, okay, this checklist is literally the
yeah,
best.
yeah. It took a lot of time. Like it was like months to get that right. Um, and then of course we got a lot of resources too. I mean, there's like over $1,000 worth of resources in there. I've pulled together my friends and my family, like not my real family, not my blood family, but like my family, like John Skelly, Andrew
Yeah.
Melrose,
Yeah.
Reagan, some of these people in the industry, and they've been so kind. They're like, yeah, well, we'll give them like discounts on our service, our virtual
Mhm.
consults, and then my buddy Josh, he owns a lab in Fort Lauderdale. He's like, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do homeowner testing for them, yeah, and we'll give them free overnight shipping, blah, blah. And I was able to get all this stuff to provide, and like $250 off one of my favorite air purifiers from my buddy Tanner, and just like we're like, oh my gosh, everyone's being so helpful, boom, and we just slap it in there. No one was asking for anything in return. It's like not a kickback system. The only kickback thing I have on there is like my affiliate Amazon page because I had to
Right.
make we made like a curated tool lists. And so we have
Mm-hmm.
curated tool. You don't have to go find it. I went through, and I'm not even joking, I went through 8 moisture meters trying to figure out the right one. Not professional ones. Like I bought like 8 moisture meters on Amazon saying, nope, that's not it. That's not it. And then we did the same thing with thermal imagers. We did the same thing with flashlights. And like, what is the best thing? And so we curated these Amazon lists so you could just go click, 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 click.
Mm-hmm.
And we just try to make it as simple as possible. So lots of
Awesome.
resources. If you decide to
Check it
dive
out.
deeper into any given topic, we give you curated like YouTube playlists too. Say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, you want to learn more about the Army test? Okay, look at these. You want to learn more about, how to find an inspector? Look at these videos. So we just try to be as well rounded as possible to help people.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you said something about, okay, people said they're going to check their home every 3 months for certain things. Are there things that we should be checking in our homes like that's a common question I get too. How often should I be checking my filters, my this, my that? Like are there a couple things that people should put on their calendars for that sort of thing?
Well, number one thing is going to be your HVAC and your water heater. The HVAC is things that you might not be able to check, although we do show you how to check your coils homeowner friendly in the course. But, maintenance wise, HVAC is huge. That is like one of the number one things that we see failing or having mold issues. And I mean, I might be a little bit different, but some people get them checked twice a year. I like to do it on the change of every season. So that's 4 times a year. And what are we looking for? We're making sure that the filter is right. We're making sure that ducts haven't collapsed, static pressure is good, that it's cooling and drying properly, that there's no mold in the unit, that it's still sealed, things aren't falling apart. Like just the regular basic stuff that can turn into big problems. One of the biggest problems that I see that are so easily fixed, homeowners miss all the time, is your condensate line, right? During the summertime, your air conditioner is removing a lot of moisture out of the air, and it goes out of that condensation line, and they get clogged. And if you're not keeping up with that and you haven't touched it in a year, 2 years, 3 years to clear it and clean it, that is the biggest, most expensive mistake you could do when it takes, a couple minutes and some vinegar, to just go in there and do that, because we get called out to losses all the time. And it was a $15,000 project because it overflowed. It went down into the first floor. Now you got to remove all the ceiling and all the flooring in the second floor. And then like the house got contaminated because you didn't catch it fast enough. And wow, man, I wish I just poured some vinegar down there. That took a minute, and that, so HVAC is huge. There's a lot of stuff you could do with your exterior to make sure that things are good. Like, are my gutters shedding water away? Are they getting, clogged? That's a very, very common basic thing. What about my windows? Are they starting to separate and crack? What about my stucco? Is it starting to separate and crack? A lot of basic stuff. And you'll learn about how to identify these things in the class, and then that will just intuitively tell you what you need to just be checking on.
Yeah, and a good reminder to use those dehumidifiers as well. Yeah, people always say, like, what air purifier do you recommend? And I have the ones that I like, but the first thing I say is, okay, first thing you want, even before an air purifier, I think top is dehumidifier, personally, because it's a moisture issue.
Well, yeah, there's 2 things with the dehumidifier. One, controlling your humidity is one of the single best factors you could do for air quality. It's ventilation and humidity are the 2 biggest factors, because when humidity goes up, it's not just mold, it's bacteria. Some viruses can stay in the air longer. You have particulates, right? They ride along on little water vapors. So do chemicals and all these things. It also attracts more bugs, right? So now you're dealing with more roaches, which, by the way, there's lots of interesting studies between roaches and endotoxins in a home, which are toxins that come from bacteria. So lots and lots of connections to humidity. Get that humidity down. If your air conditioner is doing a wonderful job of that, then great. Don't run them every day to hear that really annoying humming. But you should still have them in the house. You should still have one sitting in your yard or in your storage shed or whatever, just in case something were to ever happen. Your air conditioner goes out. You need something to handle the humidity. Or if you ever had a flood, you should throw that in that room to help dry it quickly. Everybody should have a dehumidifier, whether you're using it every day or not.
Yeah, I mean, I have little ones in each bathroom because, my kids are not going to turn on the fan or things like that. So definitely want to keep those generally humid areas from getting too humid.
Totally.
So,
yeah,
I think you mentioned something really interesting about how mycotoxins, even though they're microscopic, they don't actually just diffuse through tile or things like that. Can you speak a little more to that? Because I feel like that is a very common misconception.
Yes, it is. And before I get into this, I sometimes when we start adding information into people's knowledge base that they didn't formerly know of, it may come off as like, you don't have to worry about it. We definitely still need to worry about mycotoxins. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Mycotoxins are the single biggest factor that I see in my clients having issues or autoimmune flares or not being able to heal. So mycotoxins are huge. They're very important. Trust me. All right. From my personal health experience and what I do for work, I should not be in this field with my autoimmune issues. Here I am. And what I can tell you is if I make mistakes, there was actually a quite small divergent. Some of the two or three of the videos that you saw in the course where there was a lot of mold happening in their house, like behind the wallpaper and the water heater closet and stuff like that. Some of those things I just couldn't record with the mask on because you couldn't hear me. And we recorded in that house for about a day and a half, and I was out for the count. It took a lot to get back from that. And so it's for real, man. It's for real. Now, with that being said, how do the mycotoxins travel? How do you get exposed to them? A lot of people think that it's a gas. All right, they think that it's just kind of flying around independently and on its own. So if you have mold in a wall, it's just going to diffuse through the wall and just show up and just absorb into all your porous materials. That is not how it works. It's not a gas. All right, and mycotoxins are not volatile. What they are is it's a secondary metabolite that's produced by mold, usually during digestion phase or during its defensive phases, trying to protect itself. But it's a toxin that's bound to, as just a chemical compound, bound to the spore, bound to the fungal fragments that are flying around, bound to the actual growth structure, the sporangium, conidium, whatever. They're bound to the actual structure. So they're not going to fly around on their own. However, what is mold? How did God make these things? He made them to reproduce by spreading spores everywhere, right? And so the spores are really the main driver of your mycotoxin exposure because they're flying around everywhere. You're breathing them in. If they're on your contents, you're sitting on them, you're stepping on them, you're walking on them, you're getting some into your saliva, going into your stomach. That is the main source of exposure. Now, if someone starts to mess with things like destroying drywall, spraying chemicals on it, you have bits and pieces of the roots and the fungal fragments and stuff flying around that also have the mycotoxins on them. So even tiny particulates can collect in the dust that are problematic for us. But we have to differentiate whether it's a gas or if it's a particle. And most of the time, it's a particle riding on another particle. That's kind of the best way to look at it. And if you know that, and if your inspector knows that, you can better assess what to do about it, what could have been affected, and most importantly, what do I do with my contents and my stuff?
Right. Yeah, so interesting. And that translates well to the body too, because we think about how we breathe in the spores and the mycotoxins. And yes, you're getting them in through the GI tract, whether through food or through your environment, but also, the spores can go so far in your sinuses, but then those mycotoxins and the smaller fragments can go through via the olfactory bulb and catch a ride straight to the brain. So the problem, people ask about me a lot of times about how do I find out if there's mold in my body? But the real question is, how has mold affected your body? Like, how inflamed are you due to mold and toxins and full toxin load and all the different byproducts of the ecosystem of microbes that you've been exposed to? So, these mycotoxins, yes, they're with the spores and we're breathing them in, but they're causing that inflammation in the body, and they can circulate throughout. So that's really interesting and definitely ties in well to the clinical side. So then, other question too is, are there certain types of mold, as a mycologist, are there certain types of mold that you think of are like the top 3, worst molds? Or if you have certain molds, then you should definitely not, get this rental? Or is it more about the amount of molds? Or how do you think about that risk?
So the main thing is, it's not about the different types of mold, because you shouldn't have any sources of mold growth in your house, no matter what it is. There's no such thing as a good source of mold growth in your house. There's no such thing as a non-problematic source of mold growth in your house. If you have mold growth in your house, that is a symptom of a moisture problem. And the moisture problem means that there are also other molds that could be growing too. And this is where things get a little bit in the gray area. Yes, there are more mold that may be more clinically significant. If we wanted to get technical, like Stachybotrys can produce a lot of trichothecenes. Penicillium and aspergillus, they can produce ochratoxin A. And so these things are important. Fusarium can produce fumonisine and deoxynivalenol. But the thing is, we can't focus on the mold because testing is limited, right? So if you have a wall full of mold and I swab in one little area and it says it's one type, that doesn't mean that's the only type there. Therefore, it doesn't matter to me that said cladosporium. Oh, it's less concerning. Well, how do I know there wasn't other things? Is there water damage in the house? Has it caused a problem? Has it caused potential contamination? It's an issue, whether or not. Now, the amount obviously is important, right? There is a such thing as a normal amount of mold in an environment. So I would say amount is bigger, but I would also say the scale of water damage event is also big too. Like, was it just a little bit of sweating at the bottom of your window, just a tiny bit, and you're starting to see a little bit? Is it a little bit on your caulking, or has the window been leaking for 10 years? Has the shower been leaking for 10 years? So that's kind of where we look at as far as triaging, is this horrible or not?
Yeah, and then comparing to the outside levels too, right? Which I know outside it can be high as well, but that can
Totally.
be.
Yeah, we just did one. I just read it yesterday. It was 50,000 spores per cubic meter. So, if you imagine just a cubic meter in front of your face, every step that you take, you're walking into 50,000 spores. That was a normal baseline for outside. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, all those variables. But I think that's actually really important to conceptualize and can help with not being overwhelmed by this. It's not a matter of nitpicking what one or 20 types of mold and bacteria you have in your home. It's a matter of where are the moisture sources, where are these issues with either the materials, or what are these different things that we need to use to prevent mold and moisture issues or treat anything that has already happened. So I think that's really helpful to
Yeah,
think
and you
about.
also have to consider total toxic load.
Yeah.
Try not to focus mainly on mold. Of course, that is a huge driver, but if you can get your total toxic load down, your air quality is going to be better. So, like, what do I have in my house that's microplastics? What do I have in my house that's producing too much electricity? What do I have in my house that's producing too many chemicals? What am I doing in the house that could be contributing to the humidity or to bacteria? How clean is it? How much am I keeping the dust up, right? Which is going to be a harboring station for all of this stuff, right? And so, whatever that case may be, you just have to consider your environmental load and get that down, because a lot of people ask, like, well, what do I do if I'm still living in mold, right? And there's a lot of things you could do, right? You could dilute the air with outdoor air. You can run air purification. You can seal up. Remember, source control is huge. Seal up the areas. If you know there's mold in that cabinet, tape it up, right? Like, whatever it is, you could do things. But you know what else you could do to help your symptoms is get the other environmental stuff that you can't control out. Get rid of those freaking Glade plugins, sorry Glade, and toss them in the trash, right? Like, what am I using cleaners for? How can I alternate? Like, how can I go into more non-toxic stuff? What am I using to wash my clothes? Can I switch to 100% cotton for my bed sheets? Whatever it is, just reduce everything else, and the toxic load in the house as a whole, as a sum, will go down as you're trying to handle the mold problem too.
That's so true. Yep. Home and body, absolutely. As I like to talk about all the time, your toxin bucket, every small choice counts. So anything you can do, every little thing helps, filtering your water, all of these things, it helps with your total toxin load. And, you're absorbing through skin too. So all of those products, all those skin products and everything. So just taking a little inventory of what's around your house, what's in your pantry, what ultra processed foods are there, what high mold foods are there. And for those listening, make sure you have my guide on what to do in a moldy environment. Probably my most popular guide because there's so many people in this situation. So I'll link that as well. So this is great. So, any other common pitfalls to avoid when trying to evaluate your indoor environments, or when you're thinking you need to fix any kind of microbial issue in the home?
Yeah, this is kind of more of like a broad thing, and this is just also from experience because of just what I do with work. It's not a technical thing. It's a philosophical thing. And when you so here's what I would say the number one problem I see: when you see a problem, or when you think there's a problem, or you get a lab result back clinically, right, and it says that your urinalysis or blood serum antibody test or whatever is high, you immediately want to solve the problem. A lot of these people, especially, like, I don't know what the relationship is with immunocompromised, like, autoimmune people and intelligence, but it seems to be very analytical, intelligent people that are dealing with this. Or maybe it's just me because I'm the smartest guy in the world.
No,
But
that's so true. No, I mean, yeah, my husband was quite sick from mold and other things, and he's like a certified genius. So,
yeah, and these people, they're problem solvers, right?
yep.
And so you get this result back and you want to act. Take a breath, slow down, figure out what needs to be done, find the right people to help you. Don't jump off and just get the first guy, first girl, whatever. Don't just jump right into the remediation. Slow down. Not only are you a problem solver and you want to get things solved, you want to get your health back, but you're probably also dealing with not that great energy. You're probably dealing with brain fog, right? And it's just too much. It's just too much to handle this. It's just overwhelming. And it's just like, well, I don't even know what to do. I just have to do whatever I can. And then what happens is, let's flash forward 10 months and you've spent $80,000 on your house. You're still sick. You still don't know what's going on. And you feel like you're back at ground zero. I see that all the time. So like health issues alone will wear on you. They will keep you at 0% energy, 0%. I don't even know how I'm going to handle this, especially because it affects your work, which affects your finances, and then affects your relationship with your husband or wife. And then it affects your relationship with your kids and how present you can be and how their health is. And it's really, really hard to handle this. And it just affects your general quality of life. So, it's just really important to consider that you can do this very wrong if you don't have the right people and if you don't slow down and just try not to panic. One of my favorite movies of all time is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if you know that movie.
Yeah.
And it's a big book, and right on the front it says, "Don't panic." and that's it, right? You just have to slow down and be like, okay, let me figure this out. I know that's easier said than done because there's a lot of misinformation out there. People have different opinions, both in the environment and functional medicine. They're going to have different ways that they want to treat you or treat your house. But at the end of the day, you're your own advocate. You have to make your own decisions. And so take the time to get the right information, to get the right solutions for your house before you move forward, because I don't want you wasting money. I don't want you having to take out a second mortgage. I don't want you having to figure out what to do here because you rushed and went too fast. The amount of times I hear people say, man, if I knew what I knew 10 months ago, right? So let's just slow down and let's figure it out slowly.
Absolutely. You don't have to figure everything out today, just your next best step, and get the right pros involved. And we can help for sure. So thank you for that and for all the insights you've shared. So, like I said, I'm going to put those links in the show notes. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, if you guys want to go on my social media, it's brantley.iaq. And that's, we give a lot of free information on what to find, what to look for. Some of it's technical, but a lot of it we try to keep simple to say, hey, look for this, look for that. And we like to be entertaining and just help give free information out there. If you want to hire us for like inspections or consultation, I would probably say envirohealth.co. That's my main website. And that's where you can hire me and my team to help you guys out.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Brantley. This has been the Detox Docs Report. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.